To the FIFA's Women's World Cup, where we have results from the first semifinal match after a cagey but goalless first half between Spain and Sweden. Second half got crazy. Spanish substitute Salma Paralelo made a smart run to score the opening goal in the 81st minute, but Sweden evened that out in the 90th minute on a corner kick to seal Sweden's fate. It is the first trip for the final for Spain, and they'll play the winner of Australia versus England, that match being played in Sydney Wednesday morning local time. For more about the money and the business and sponsorships and all things sports, especially when it comes to the World Cup, Kate Delaney, she's an Emmy Award-winning sports commentator and CEO of Delaney Group Media. Thanks for joining us. So how would you rate this year's Women's World Cup? And I say that because for a lot of my friends who were watching the USA team, they were really excited until they weren't in the tournament anymore, and now no one can wake up in time to watch the other matches.
Well, I think you nailed it, Phil. The problem is the time for most people in the U.S. of when these games go on, and because the U.S. isn't in it, some of that interest has waned, but it certainly hasn't in other countries, and there are people watching, of course. Australians are crazy about it. They're filling the stadiums, and the ratings are okay. They're not quite what they were, and I don't think they will be when all the numbers come in for this World Cup like they were in 2019, but it's because the U.S. was in it, and we have so many people that were watching it. You had 14 million overall that watched on Fox last time, but this time it's going to be a little bit lower than that, but not in the individual countries where they're still in it.
I mean, I'll think optimistically. I think for the finals, you probably get a fairly good bump up depending on the time of day the match is at. But I do want to ask you this, is, you know, we talk a lot often about the men's World Cup versus the women's World Cup. And let's just take sponsorships, for example, right? One gets a couple $100 million and one gets multiples of that. Why is that?
Well, again, it's that fighting for that equal time. It's the fact that women's sports just, I mean, they just don't get the attention that the men do unless you're talking about the Olympics and certain Olympic sports, or unless you're talking about tennis, where it's really much more on equal ground there. But with soccer, you still aren't there yet at this point. Although the more stars that are developed, because I think it's about individuals and stars. We're seeing that obviously when you look at the men, and you look at even club play like Messi, what he's done for Miami, for example, because he's huge. He's a huge name. And it's about those personalities. So as more women get those personalities out there and they're developed, I think there's more of an interest in sponsorship.
What do you think brands, you know, if you're pitching the World Cup sponsorship to a brand, and they're interested, you know, what is the value proposition from the brand's perspective? And for those that did make sponsorships, do you think they're happy with the value they got back this year?
That's a great question. I think some of them are because they're building along with the group. So in other words, some of the sponsorships, when we talk about sponsorships, they're willing to kind of grow with the women. That's what I've heard with some of them. So they come in at a lower price point, and as it goes further and further and deeper along, they're willing to kick in more money. And I think that's a good way to sell it. If I were selling a package, that's what I would sell. And of course, I would again sell the personalities, and I would sell the interest in soccer, that it's certainly gone up in the United States and in other countries. It's been there, like England, obviously, and Spain, and so many of the Latin American countries, because we see the interest is feverishly high.
When you talk about promoting the individual talents on the team, let's just take the USA team, which is easy because they're not in the tournament anymore, but there has been some controversy, right? You have very animated and outspoken individuals who some people love and some people hate. Do you think that helps or hurts the mission of the sport?
I think it's okay. I mean, look, you know, we have that in men's sports, right? And we certainly have seen this in other women's sports. Sometimes there's the bad guy, the bad boy, if you will, like Novak Djokovic in tennis, for example. He's a great example. And we're seeing that happen with women in other sports too. So I think it's okay when you have some controversy, because you know what they say, no publicity or any publicity is good publicity. So it doesn't matter unless it's really nasty and has something to do with charges or criminal or whatever, thing like that.
And when you talk about companies sponsoring individual players, you can sponsor the tournament, but you can also sponsor the whole country, right? You could sponsor the country of Sweden. You can sponsor there seems to be a lot more flexibility, at least in this particular sport, than I see, say, in ice hockey or in baseball. You can't just be a sponsor, for example, of Shohei Ohtani. You're generally a sponsor of the Angels, right? But in football or soccer, you can actually have multiple avenues of promoting your brand. And I think that in itself is actually quite unique.
I agree with you. And we're starting to see that shift, by the way, in other sports because you know, you use the word brand, and that's what so many athletes are doing. They're becoming a brand now more than ever. We've seen that really shift in probably the last decade, but especially now. So I'll give you the example for the US. Sophia Smith, she was heavily branded. A lot of money went her way as far as sponsorship. Lindsey Horan, another one, she got a lot of sponsorship money too as well.
Yeah, it's really cool to see how this has all evolved. Kate, good to see you. Enjoy the last big game, I suppose, and we'll catch you on the other side. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Phil.